waving these watercolor pieces. But something I want to mention, because this is also kind of interesting, and I guess it's evidence because since it's a show and tell, who knows the destination of this strange piece of paper. But I just decided it would be interesting to take a steel plate that I found in the alley and soak a page and throw the plate down on the page. So in some of my works, so here, instead of sort of affecting as we do as painters, and earlier you and I had a conversation about trompe-l'oeil, and where we are, painting has the sort of illusionary benefit. We're all trained in the sort of the apparatus of a picture, the vehicle, as it were, of a picture plane, and the sort of relative believability of space, whether it's a perspectival kind of landscapey kind of thing, or if it's object, delicate kind of object rendering, but it's that notion of representation. So how, as I'm sanding and folding, and if you take a closer inspection of some of these elements, some feel plant-like, they sort of read plant, but upon closer inspection, in fact, take a magnifier and discover that there's the hand, there's the brush, etc. So I thought, why not discuss representation? Why not have the thing itself? And so here is a chemical reaction, rust, as we all know it to be on our cars or where else, that becomes what literally the thing that's elusive to us, becomes the chemical experience. Book pages.
Andrew, one quick question.
Yeah.
All these samples that you have there, are those work studies, pieces of work, or
Do you know?
are they experiments, or
I would say
combination?
everything here at some point or another will wind up in a picture. Pardon?
Yeah, well, become
Yeah.
these in a sense. This is why I think it was great to have you bring this in.
I mean, this this kind of exists on its own, I guess, in some respects. It's the same type of experience. So that's a good question, though, because in a way, what constitutes a study versus and I use the word alchemical. I mean, the alchemy, that kind of imaginary, turning lead to gold and all this business. I think you want to pull something out. Yeah, you can spread them out. Honestly. I would say for a collage artist, or sculptor for that matter, sometimes your palette becomes, instead of, the oil painter who maybe pre-mix some of the colors or have the spectrum of color on palette or plate. If I'm working, there may be a main character, like a plant form or something that I was very focused on, that I decided would be a special feature of the picture, and premeditate that maybe in a study in a watercolor that I drew or something. But a lot of the other elements that are sort of supporting elements, and I would point to like little transparencies, stained Chinese rice paper that becomes, in a way, like egg tempera, become the lenses again. Egg tempera were these sort of translucent films of color, which were made luminous because of the white gesso ground that was reflective, oil absorbent, but still light reflective. Light would penetrate and then it comes back through, kind of making this glow. Well, here in a similar aesthetic, I'm using kind of a rice paper that has a translucency that I've stained. And so these elements are not so much studies as they are creating kind of a palette of materials and colors and forms and things to use. So I would argue, and let me see if I can find a comparable piece. These curious shapes here, which I'm still working on today. Every once in a while there's a stray fragment that comes in. These were actually large stencil numbers that I painted and then cut up into pieces. And I did a whole series of works that were just in these sort of almost, they had kind of a hieroglyph or suggestive kind of language form. The numbers in some cases were nearly visible, so they still had a kind of a code or language intact, but didn't amount to it. So again, like so many of the elements of the work, they're suggestive of things. But every once in a while, I might throw one into a picture, because of its, here I can pass these around also, making them kind of an object. It's about. So they'll have a home at some point, once and for all. You know, for the time being, they remain, and actually I kind of like them in a stack, and it's not necessarily an artistic statement or a finished piece, but there's something about the sort of deck of cards of otherwise curious and suggestive shapes that becomes kind of interesting in its own right. So that's the elasticity, I guess, of the studio environment. You know, how many experiments actually trigger something that then later becomes formal, or how many experiments, if you're sculpting or collaging, become some element of it feeds into something else you made.
Are you one of these guys who like kind of be walking in this kind of urban geometric grid of a city, and then you'll see like this weird stray woodlot somewhere, and wonder like how it got there? I mean, 'cause,
Absolutely. And I like how you said one
Like-
of those guys. I like.
well,
to say.
I just
And
I just
actually-
like I just saw it the other day. Like I just saw like this weird stray woodlot in the middle, like on some blocks where I go, I never noticed that till now. What is that doing there? How did it get there?
It's yes, all the time. In fact, some people say, well, how can you be by literal translation or understanding? It's how can you be a painter of nature when you're in a city? Is it some kind of like longing or wish or dream or fantasy? But again, that's that kind of definition that it's like something outside of ourselves. You know, I think that contrast that you described is just another kind of manifestation of this tension we feel, you know, all the time as a person in a landscape, regardless if it's geometric or kind of man-made or not. There was something important to me apparently in kind of hand making most of the elements, and I don't know if that is because then I feel physically kind of conceptually closer to it. In other words, if it's within my hands and within my power, even if it's a replica or mimicry. Recently, I've been making, and I don't know if most of you probably are familiar with that early kind of penmanship paper with the dotted lines in the middle, and the sometimes blue and pink lines and things like that. I've been hand making that paper recently. Where it's going to go, I'm not 100% sure. But again, it's this like kind of physical, you know, recovery of maybe a certain specific experience in my life, but at the same time, obviously it's imperfect. You know, you can see the pencil lines and where they stop, and I'm taking a hole punch and I'm kind of punching it kind of erratically through the sides. With one exception, and the piece that's on the farthest to the right has some text in it that actually comes from a book, the language of which I have no idea, but if anyone reads Czech language, they might be able to translate some of this. And I made a page of it as kind of a background. That would be, remember Tim Rollins, these book pieces? Back in the 80s, yeah. Very interesting story about this, because very rarely, and I think the word collage, in most people's minds, sort of implies this appropriation. You know, they think of torn magazine pages and things like that, this kind of appropriation of artifacts around us, which is in a very literal way, kind of recovering, you know, otherwise the bruised, beaten, discarded, you know, and elevating them, as we did historically in the early 20th century, kind of elevating it or recovering it back into art. This is one case where I do appropriate something. I was visiting a store, and I think it's closed now, an antique shop called Praha, or Prague, on the north side, helping a friend look for a table or something like that. And I found these books, this little series. It was like a literature series, because some of the authors I understood or remembered, recognized, and others I didn't. But it probably like a Reader's Digest kind of literary giants, you know, kind of series or something in Czech. And I grabbed this one book that was fairly thick, and this binding was falling apart, and I kind of held on to it for a while. And I thought, well, the format looks interesting because there seemed to be dates. You know, it seemed to be organized in almost a journal kind of presentation. But I made no other assumption because I couldn't translate it. So I'm carrying the book around, and we go to the front desk, or the register, and the guy said, you know, I have more. This looks kind of beat up. You know, are you reading this? Are you keeping it? And I said, no, I want to take it home. It's only $4. Maybe I'll make drawings in it, because it was a perfect kind of little hand-carrying book for rendering. Then that evolved. like the artifacts you mentioned, are they studies? Are they going to become elements of a larger piece? Then I thought, well, what if I cut up the pages, put them into a collage? But then, of course, the collage process is